Hi, this is Greg Perry. I'm going to do a video about the palace or the Chateau de Versailles. I've been thinking the last 6 months to a year, reminiscing. About 15 years ago, I was in Paris and at the École Bull, which is the oldest and most infamous trade school in the world. And there are days that we would go to the Palace of Versailles and actually go into the lab and do conservation of items and do restoration of pieces. And as the ravages of time, your life goes on, these things turn into a slight memory. So I'd like to do a little video series of my memories and some additional information about the Chateau de Versailles, at one point the epicenter of the world. From my perspective, when I was there 18 and then to 15 years ago, I actually carved a frame, which is going to be beside me. Did much in marquetry, and I did a lot of gilding restoration. So I think we'll touch on those in a future video. But for now, we're going to talk about the architecture and the societal and economic changes, how France came to being, all around Versailles in battle with Louis XIV that begins. So let's sit back and we'll do this in a couple segments, and probably in the end we'll have about 6 segments of this. Okay, thanks. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, welcome to my Decorative Arts Conservation Studio. This is Greg Perry. We're going to talk about the Chateau de Versailles today. The Palace de Versailles was the principal residence of the kings of France from Louis XIV in 1682 and the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. It is approximately 14 miles southwest of the center of Paris. The palace is now a French historic monument and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with such notable features as the Hall of Mirrors, the Opera Theatre, and the Royal Apartments. Off-site is the Grand Trianon and the Petit Trianon, which was once a small hamlet created for Marie Antoinette. In addition, in the park, the vast French landscape garden contains 18th century geometric beds with canals, fountains, and grooves and mazes laid out by the famous landscape architect André Le Nôtre. During the French Revolution, the palace was stripped of all its furnishings and vast accoutrements, but a vast majority have been returned, with about 75% of the palace rooms restored at present. 17th century, we'll talk about the residence of Louis XIII and XIV. The site of the existing Palace of Versailles was first occupied by a small village and church. This was the actual center of the town. Versailles, at that point, surrounded by forest, filled with abundant game. It was owned by the Gondy family and overseen by the Priory of Saint-Julien, overseer of the village. King Henry IV went hunting in Versailles in 1589 and returned in 1642 and 1609. And on his adventures, he stayed in the village inn in Versailles. His son, the future Louis XIII, came on his own hunting trip there in 1607. After he became king in 1610, Louis XIII returned to the village. He bought some land, and in 1623 and 24 built a modest one-story hunting lodge for he and his friends on the site of the current marble courtyard. Louis XIII was staying there in November of 1630 during an event, the Day of the Dupe, when the enemies of the king's chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, aided by the king's mother, Marie de Medici, tried to overtake the government. The king defeated the plot and sent his mother into exile and eventually death. After the event, Louis XIII decided to make his hunting lodge into Versailles a true royal palace. The king purchased the surrounding territory from the Gondy family and in 1632 commissioned the royal architect Louis Laveau to replace the hunting lodge. Laveau designed the palace of brick and stone with classical pilasters in the Greek Doric style and high slate-covered roofs surrounding by a courtyard of the original hunting lodge. The work took place between 1632 and 1634. The gardens and park were also enlarged, reaching essentially the size that it is today. No enlargement of the gardens or the chateau footprint have been made since that time. just refinement after embellishment within its borders. The future Louis XIV was a frequent resident of the new palace, and continued his visits after becoming the king in 1643. He became particularly interested in Versailles after his marriage to Marie Theresa of Spain in 1660. After the death of Cardinal Mazan in 1661, he decided to rebuild, embellish, and enlarge the existing palace and transform it into the setting for both rest and elaborate entertainment on the grandest scale the world has ever seen. The first phase of expansion, 1661 through 78, was designed and supervised by the architect Louis Laveau. He added 3 new wings, built of stone, known as the envelope, to the north, south, and west of the original palace. These buildings had nearly flat roofs covered with lead, which directly resulted in massive amount of workers actually going insane from contact with the lead to their skin.